The paper coffee cup shook slightly in my hands as I sat in the hospital waiting room. My mother's heart surgery would start in an hour, and my father was pacing nervously, looking anywhere but at me. Dr. Mitchell is the best cardiothoracic surgeon in the state, the nurse assured us. Your mother is in excellent hands. I caught my father's eye and saw a flicker of recognition at the doctor's name. He quickly looked away, but I knew he was thinking about it, about the name we'd chosen together on a cold November morning 25 years ago. My son's name. The one they made me give away. Mrs. Parker. A familiar voice called from the doorway. The surgeon would like to speak with you before the procedure. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. Of course, Emily. Lead the way. My father's head snapped up. You know the nurse? I know a lot of people here, I said quietly, following Emily down the hallway. The truth was, I knew everyone on this floor. I'd been coming to this hospital every Thursday for the past 3 years, ever since I'd finally found my son, or rather, since he found me. My name is Laura Parker, and 25 years ago, my parents forced me to give up my baby boy for adoption. I was 16, terrified, and had no choice. But life has a way of coming full circle, and sometimes the paths we're forced to abandon lead us right back to where we're meant to be. The memory of that day still burns clear in my mind. I was sitting in my hospital bed, still sore from giving birth, when my parents came in with the adoption papers. This is for the best, Laura, my mother said, not meeting my highs. You're too young. You can't raise a baby. But I want to, I pleaded, cradling my newborn son. Please just help me figure it out. I'll finish school. I'll get a job. Enough, my father's voice cut through my protests. This isn't up for discussion. That baby deserves real parents, not a teenage mistake. Sign the papers. I looked down at my son's perfect face, memorizing every detail. His tiny nose, exactly like mine. The way his fingers curled around my thumb. The soft dark hair that already showed signs of curling. Can I at least name him? I whispered. They exchanged a look, then nodded. I picked up the pen with trembling fingers and wrote James Mitchell Parker on the form. James for my grandfather, who'd been the only one to show me kindness during my pregnancy. Mitchell because it sounded strong, professional, the kind of name that belonged on a doctor's office door. Then I signed the papers that gave away my rights as his mother, and they took him from my arms. The next few years passed in a fog. I finished high school, went to college, built a career in publishing. On the surface, I did everything my parents wanted, became the daughter they could be proud of again. But every November 12th, on James's birthday, I would buy a small blue cupcake and make a wish. The same wish, year after year, that he was happy, healthy, and loved. That someday, somehow, I would find him again. I never told my parents that I'd registered with adoption agencies, hoping he might look for me one day. Never mentioned that I kept a special email address just for him. Never admitted that I scanned crowds, looking for a face that might have my nose, my curls. Then 3 years ago, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, I got the email I'd been waiting for my entire adult life. Dear Ms. Parker, my name is James Mitchell. I believe you might be my birth mother. I'd had to read the email 10 times before the words sank in. He was a doctor, a surgeon actually, at Boston General Hospital. He was married to a pediatrician named Sophie. He wanted to meet me if I was willing. We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop near the hospital. I got there an hour early, changing tables 3 times before settling in a quiet corner. When he walked in, I knew him immediately. He had my curls, though shorter and more managed than mine. My nose set in a face that looked so much like his biological father's it made my heart catch. But his eyes, those were all his own. Laura, he said softly, approaching my table. I stood up, my legs shaking. James, you look like you, he finished, smiling. Except taller. We talked for hours that day. He told me about his adoptive parents, kind, loving people who had supported his dream of becoming a doctor. About meeting Sophie in medical school. About wondering his whole life where he came from. They told me I could look for you when I turned 18, he said, stirring his 3rd cup of coffee. But I waited. I wanted to be established. To show you that I made something of myself. You didn't have to prove anything to me, I told him, fighting back tears. Just knowing you're happy, that's everything I ever wished for. He reached across the table and took my hand. I am happy, and I'd like you to be part of my life, if you want to be. From that day forward, we began building a relationship. Weekly coffee dates turned into family dinners with him and Sufi. He showed me around his hospital, introduced me to his colleagues. I attended medical conferences where he presented his research, bursting with pride but never revealing our connection. We kept our relationship private, not out of shame but because it was precious to us. Sacred. The only people who knew were Sophie, James' adoptive parents, who were wonderfully supportive, and my sister Kate. And now here I was, walking toward his office while my father paced in the waiting room, unaware that the surgeon about to operate on my mother was his grandson. James stood when I entered, professional in his white coat but with a familiar warmth in his eyes. "Mrs. Parker," he said formally, then dropped his voice. "Mom, how are you holding up?" I sank into the chair across from James's desk, letting out a shaky breath. "I'm okay. It's just surreal. All these years of keeping our secret, and now I'm about to operate on my biological grandmother," he finished, running a hand through his curls. A gesture so like mine it made my heart ache. While Grandpa paces in my waiting room, having no idea who I am. The word Grandpa hung in the air between us. In the 3 years since we'd reunited, James had never referred to my parents that way. They didn't deserve that title, we both knew it. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked. "We could request another surgeon. No one would question it." James shook his head, his expression turning serious. "I'm the best chance she has. This procedure, it's complicated. And besides," he gave me a small smile, "maybe it's time they knew. Maybe this is how it's supposed to happen." I thought about all the moments that had led us here, the birthdays spent apart, the graduations and achievements they'd missed, the day James had won his first major medical award, and I'd sat in the back of the ceremony, silently bursting with pride. "They might not react well," I warned. "You know how they are." "I do," he agreed. "You've told me enough stories. But I'm not that baby they forced you to give up anymore. I'm Dr. James Mitchell, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery, and I'm going to save my grandmother's life, whether they like it or not." A knock at the door interrupted us. Sophie poked her head in, her kind face concerned. "James? They're ready to prep Mrs. Anderson for surgery." He stood up, straightening his coat. "Thanks, honey. I'll be right there." After Sophie left, he turned back to me. "Ready?" I nodded, standing up. "Just be careful with her, okay?" "Always," he promised, then added with a hint of mischief, "After all, she's family." We walked back to the waiting room together, maintaining our professional distance. My father looked up as we approached, his face a mix of hope and anxiety. "Mr. Parker," James said, extending his hand. "I'm Dr. Mitchell. I'll be performing your wife's surgery today." My father shook his hand, studying James's face with a slight frown. "You seem very young to be doing this kind of procedure." "Dad," I warned, but James just smiled. "I assure you, Mr. Parker, I'm more than qualified. In fact, I performed this exact surgery over 200 times with a success rate of 98%. I watched my father process this information, saw him noting James's confidence, his professional manner. If only he knew the full story, how James had worked his way through medical school, graduating top of his class. How he'd chosen cardiothoracic surgery because he wanted to fix broken hearts, both literally and metaphorically. "The procedure should take about 4 hours, James continued. "Mrs. Parker here can show you to the family waiting area. I'll update you as soon as we're finished." As he turned to leave, my father called out, "Dr. Mitchell? Your name? We once knew a Mitchell family." James paused, glancing at me before responding. "It's a common name, sir. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a surgery to prepare for." I led my father to the waiting area, my mind racing. In 4 hours, my mother would be out of surgery. In 4 hours, everything could change. The waiting room was quiet except for the soft hum of the coffee machine and my father's occasional sighs. I pretended to read a magazine while watching him from the corner of my eye. He looked older than I remembered, more fragile. The past 25 years hadn't been exactly kind to any of us. But seeing him now, I realized how much the weight of their decision had aged him too. "Laura," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "That doctor, there's something familiar about him." I kept my voice steady. "Oh, his eyes maybe, or the way he moves. He reminds me of—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Never mind, it's impossible." But it wasn't impossible. It was a miracle wrapped in irony. The baby they'd forced me to give up was now the man holding my mother's life in his skilled hands. I thought about the last conversation I'd had with my mother before her heart problems began. She'd been talking about regrets, though not the one that haunted me. I wish we'd traveled more, she'd said. Seen more of the world. I'd wanted to tell her about all she'd miss right here at home. About her grandson's medical school graduation, his wedding to Sophie, his rising career. About the brilliant, compassionate man he'd become despite, or perhaps because of, the circumstances of his birth. The hours crept by. Every time the waiting room door opened, my father would start, but it was never James. I knew he was focused, methodical, another trait he'd inherited from me, though my parents had never appreciated that quality in their daughter. Finally, just past the 4-hour mark, James appeared in his surgical scrubs. My father stood up so quickly he nearly knocked over his coffee. The surgery was successful, James announced, his professional mask firmly in place. There were some complications, but we managed them. She's in recovery now. My father sagged with relief. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. Thank you. James nodded, then did something that made my heart stop. He pulled off his surgical cap, revealing those familiar curls, my curls. My father's eyes widened as he stared at James, really seeing him for the first time. I saw the moment recognition dawned in his face, followed quickly by disbelief. It's not possible, he whispered. James met my father's stunned gaze steadily. Actually, Mr. Parker, it is possible. I'm your grandson. The one you made your daughter give up 25 years ago. The waiting room seemed to freeze. My father's face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions. Shock, denial, anger, fear. Finally, he turned to me. You knew, he demanded. All this time. For the past 3 years, I said quietly. James found me. He's been part of my life ever since. My father sank back into his chair, his legs seemingly unable to hold him. Does your mother know? No, James answered for me. No one in the family knows except Aunt Kate. We've kept it private. Until now. Why? My father's voice cracked. Why keep it secret? I stepped forward, years of pent-up emotions finally breaking free. Because you and Mom lost the right to know him when you forced me to give him up. Because I wanted to protect him from the same judgment and rejection I faced. Because this relationship is precious to me and I wasn't going to let anyone taint it. James put a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of support that nearly broke me. I think we should focus on grandmother's recovery right now, he said calmly. She'll be waking up soon, and this isn't the kind of news you spring on a cardiac patient. My father nodded numbly, then looked up at James with new eyes. You saved her life. It's what I do, James replied simply. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check on her in recovery. Mom, will you come with me? There are some post-operative details we should discuss. I followed James down the hospital corridor, leaving my father to process the seismic shift in his reality. Once we were safely in his office, I burst into tears. Hey, James pulled me into a hug. It's okay. We knew this day would come eventually. I know, I sniffled into his scrubs. The way he looked at you. Like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Well, I am pretty impressive, he joked, making me laugh despite my tears. Chief of surgery at 35, married to a brilliant pediatrician, just saved my grandmother's life. Not bad for a teenage mistake, right? The bitterness in those last words made my heart ache. You were never a mistake, James. Never. He smiled softly. I know, Mom. You've spent the last 3 years making sure I know that. Over the next few days, as my mother recovered in the hospital, the truth slowly unfolded. My father, unable to keep such a momentous secret, told her everything. Her reaction was not what any of us expected. She cried. Not the quiet, controlled tears I remembered from my childhood, but deep, racking sobs that had James worried about her sutures. All this time, she kept saying, looking at James with wonder. All this time you were here, becoming this amazing person, and we missed it. We missed everything. Not everything, James said gently. I'm here now. If you want to know me. The reconciliation wasn't instant or easy. There were hard conversations, painful memories to address, wounds that needed airing. My parents had to face the consequences of their actions, had to understand how their choices had affected not just me, but an entire family tree. But slowly, carefully, we began to build something new. James and Sophie invited my parents to dinner at their home. My mother got to see the wall of medical awards, the family photos that now included me, the life her grandson had built. My father struggled more with the change. Pride warred with shame every time someone mentioned Dr. Mitchell's incredible surgical skills. But even he couldn't deny the miracle of how things had come full circle. One evening, about a month after my mother's surgery, we all gathered at James and Sophie's house for dinner. As we sat around their dining table, I looked at the faces of my family, the one I'd lost and found again, the one I'd chosen, the one we were all building together. Sophie was showing my mother their wedding album, pointing out the empty seat it reserved for me in the front row, though at the time they hadn't known I'd be there. James was discussing a complicated surgical procedure with my father, who was finally allowing himself to show pride in his grandson's achievements. "Mom?" James caught my eye across the table. "You okay? You seem quiet." I smiled, thinking of that scared 16-year-old girl in the hospital, holding her baby for the last time. If only I could tell her that this moment was waiting 25 years in the future. "I'm perfect," I said. "Just perfect." Later that night, as everyone was leaving, my father pulled me aside. "Laura," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I know we can never make up for what we did, but seeing the man James has become, seeing how you've handled everything, I've never been more proud to be your father." I hugged him, feeling the years of pain and resentment begin to fade. "Thank you, Dad. That means more than you know." As I watched my parents drive away, James came to stand beside me on the porch. "So," he said, bumping my shoulder playfully, "was it worth the wait?" I looked at my son, this brilliant, compassionate man who had found his way back to me against all odds. "Every single second," I replied. We stood there together, mother and son, our shared curls glinting in the porch light, our hearts finally completely whole. Sometimes life's greatest pain leads to its greatest joy. Sometimes the babies we're forced to give up grow into the adults who save us. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, the circles we think are broken turn out to be just taking the long way around to completion.